Remember Riley June Williams? She's the woman arrested on Tuesday, accused of stealing Speaker Pelosi's laptop during the Capitol insurrection. She's now facing charges of violent entry, theft, and trespassing and obstruction. Not only that, she's also under investigation for allegedly plotting to sell Speaker Pelosi's laptop to Russian spies. And yet, she was released from jail into her mother's custody yesterday on the orders of a magistrate judge. And as the court transcript suggests, that judge appeared to take quite a bit of pride in his decision. He reminded Williams that, quote, "I took steps to protect your constitutional rights by appointing counsel for you." And he added that her counsel aggressively represented her interests. Williams is just one of many defendants from the Capitol siege who've been freed from jail pending trial. There's also the guy who infamously took Nancy Pelosi's lectern. He was released on bail. The guy with the Camp Auschwitz sweatshirt was released because prosecutors didn't even bother to seek detention. Even one of the men seen carrying zip-tie handcuffs, indicating that they may have intended to take hostages, was released by a Texas judge. It's another reminder that equal justice under the law exists in theory in this country, but not really in practice. We've seen a trend in this country where suspects who commit petty crimes like shoplifting are upcharged with felonies after their first offense. Then there are the thousands who languish in jail pending trial because they can't afford to post bond. According to the Prison Policy Initiative, black and brown defendants receive bail amounts that are twice as high as bail set for white defendants, and they are less likely to be able to afford it. Perhaps the most egregious case is that of Kalief Browder, the Bronx teenager who spent 3 years in a Rikers Island jail cell without a trial. Nearly 2 of those years were in solitary confinement, all because he was accused of stealing a backpack and couldn't afford bail. The charges were ultimately dropped, but Browder's experience at Rikers was so traumatizing, he never really recovered. He committed suicide 2 years after his release at the age of 22. With me now is Midwin Charles, civil trial and criminal defense attorney, and Paul Butler, former federal prosecutor. And Midwin, you and I have texted about this. I've seen you tweeting about this. I mean, there are defendants who are accused of almost nothing, who are sitting in Rikers or in other jails around the country and can't afford bail. How do you feel watching these attempted insurrectionists waltz out of jail and out of court, not even going to jail?
Joy, you're right. All criminal defendants are entitled to due process and equal protection under the law. Unfortunately, we do have a criminal justice system that metes out disproportionate outcomes on the basis of race. The statistic you threw up there is 100% accurate. But let me just throw another one out to you. 25% black males, or black people rather, are 25% more likely than white defendants to be held pre-trial. Now, nationally, young black men are 50% more likely than white men to be held pre-trial. And just as you said, their bail amounts are twice as high. Now, it is not surprising for me to see this disparate treatment that the insurrectionists are getting. When we talk about Kalief Browder and we talk about, for example, Black Lives Matter protests and how they were treated by Capitol Police, in terms of no restraint, right? We saw police dressed in RoboCop gear using tear gas. We didn't see that at the insurrection on January 6th. But in my experience, I have had clients that have spent more time in jail than this woman who is alleged to have stolen Nancy Pelosi's laptop for fare evasion, driving without a license. And she gets to not only not be in jail right now, but released to her mother as though she's a child. And we also have a federal judge speaking to her and about her as though she just stole a T-shirt from H&M. If you looked at the charges she was facing, you would not recognize the severity, the backdrop, the context within which she was arrested. And it's unfortunate. It is something that we have to work towards fixing in this country.
Indeed. I mean, Paul, just as a former prosecutor, you have people who are making the most absurd excuses and demands inside of these courtrooms. The Washington Post reports a former Houston police officer who was in part of the riots is trying to claim he only breached the Capitol because he wanted to see the art. You have the Los Angeles Times reporting that the rioters are arguing Trump invited them in, and now they think they should have gotten pardons. Too bad he doesn't care about y'all. I answered the call of my president, they're saying Trump told them to do it. The devil made me do it defense. And magistrates are hearing these cases and saying, you know, I think I'm going to send you home. Maybe I'll get you a Burger King and a nice organic meal to go with it. We'll treat you as if you, as you know, Midwin just said, as if you're accused of boosting, you know, a sweater from H&M. And they invaded our Capitol. Can you explain this as a prosecutor?
I can't explain it as a prosecutor or as an American. I can't explain it as an African-American person who unfortunately is all too familiar with two different systems of justice in this country, one for rich people and white people, another for low-income people and people of color. So yeah, the defenses that we've seen, the first, Trump made me do it, that's accurate, but it's not a defense to seditious conspiracy or even unlawful entry. The other defense is Antifa or the Black Lives Matter movement made me do it. There's simply no evidence that any of those folks were at the Capitol with all of these Trump supporters. And the third defense is it wasn't me, but video records, cell phone records, and eyewitness testimony all rebut that defense.
They're getting disused by their own family members and neighbors and friends. I mean, and it's not, it feels like the disparate treatment, Midwin, is not just only black and white, because you have Enrique Tarrio, who is a Afro-Cuban, who's the head of the Proud Boys, who was caught with magazines, with gun magazines, which you cannot have in the district, who was arrested for tearing down a Black Lives Matter sign, and he wasn't held. He was ejected to Florida, but he was still allowed to come out. It almost feels like there's also a difference in if your ideological makeup is conservative or your crimes relate to a conservative ideology, you also can take advantage of the disparate treatment.
Or also what it is that you are there for and what it is that you're protesting. For example, we saw a sort of, I think, a restraint approach with the men who had overtaken the Capitol in the state of Michigan. We didn't see a sort of a huge undertaking to charge them with serious crimes or anything like that. So I think you're right. It seems as though the issue that people are actually protesting seems to mete out a different treatment, but throughout the system. So not just with respect to bail, but also with respect to how police treat you, with respect to what charges you're charged with respect to whether or not you stand trial, with respect to what the sentence will be. And so I think the tell going forward with this case or with these cases are going to be, what will these people be convicted of and what sentence will they receive? Right? We have seen the disparate treatment, not just with bail, but with sentencing, for example, in cases with like Brock Turner and Lori Loughlin. I mean, there's so many different cases in so many different areas of law that make it plain that this disproportionate, like Paul was saying, two different systems for two different people is accurate.
Yeah, indeed. And Paul, I mean, you've seen the treatment of the the kid who shot up Mother Emanuel Church and got served Burger King, by police. You've seen the release of the teenager who shot two white Black Lives Matter activists and is out on bail and and allegedly throwing the white power sign. Like it feels like the ideological disparity is now starting to compete with the racial disparity in terms of treatment. Is this something about judges? Is this because there are so many conservative judges? What do you think that is about?
We can think about implicit bias where, just like we saw at the Capitol on January 6th, white danger isn't perceived the same way as threats from African Americans, even when black folks aren't actually threatening. So with bail, judges are supposed to consider the seriousness of the charges, criminal history, ties to the community, and financial circumstances. And unfortunately, the way that judges evaluate this evidence redounds often to the benefit of people who are rich or people who are white. And look, jail is a bad place if you're awaiting trial. There's evidence that people are more likely to plead guilty because they just want to go home. They can't work or spend time with their families. So there's nothing wrong with being released if you're not a danger to the community. And what we know from these domestic terrorists is that not only do they present a flight risk, but these are white supremacists who attack Congress to overturn the election. They're a clear and present danger to national security and public safety.
Yeah, somebody please tell these magistrates. Midwin Charles, Paul Butler, thank you both very much. Have a great weekend, both of you. And up next, the QAnon identity crisis. What do you do when every bat, poop, banana